couple days away. Look at it. It's looking good. Oh, awesome. Look at that cool sign, that Hutch sign. That's going to be amazing. What a look. I can't wait to see all the people down there. So cool. Look at the stage. The lights are going. Oh my goodness, it's going to be so cool. Welcome back, sports fans. Thank you for returning for another video. I am your host, Johnny Gaz. As you can see in the video leading up to today, Detroit is ready to go for the 2024 NFL Draft, and I am super excited. So we are going to end mock draft season with our final mock draft simulation, the Johnny Gaz Sports 2024 Detroit Lions Mock Draft 3.0. Let's go! We just came off a video discussing the new uniform reveal for the Detroit Lions. Definitely go and check that out. I think they did a fantastic job of resetting their uniforms heading into the 2024 season. What a great mix of old school, new school. They gave us a fantastic alternate black on black jersey. If you haven't seen them yet, definitely go check them out. Don't miss any videos on the channel by hitting that subscribe and notify bell. And if you dig the vibe here at Johnny Gaz Sports, as always, make sure to hit that like button. It is the best way to help out the channel. We are on the road to 500 subscribers. Thank you guys so much for your time, for watching these videos, for taking the time to comment. I appreciate you so much. Let's get into today's topic. So as you know, this is now our third mock draft that we'll do on the channel. The first two have focused on basically the needs of the Lions, sort of going over what the Brad Holmes and organizational approach will be. And this mock draft 3.0 will basically wrap that all up. So we'll go back to the formula that we've used on the last few mock drafts. We'll have 3 different mock draft simulations. However, this time through, we're going to stick to just one mock draft simulator, the Pro Football Network mock draft simulator. I have found that to be kind of the most ease of use mock draft simulator. It allows trades back and forth. It's the most realistic trades that I've seen. So we're going to focus right there on the Pro Football Network mock draft simulator. We will do 3 rounds again today. And again, we'll do 3 separate mock draft sims. At the end, we'll come together. We'll see which players were available for us and just kind of go as an overview to see what the Lions have available to them in the 2024 draft. Just prior to the uniform unveiling last week, the organization and Brad Holmes specifically came out and spoke to the press. They asked a lot of questions in regards to kind of what to expect as we head towards the NFL draft. And the question was asked specifically what they're going to do with pick 29. And would they look at that pick differently because obviously the draft is being held in Detroit. So would Brad Holmes, would the organization be hesitant to trade back or trade out of the first round, knowing that that would really disappoint the fan base there, especially all the folks that came down on the first night of the NFL draft, April 25th, Thursday night, just a few days away. But would that disappoint folks if he then trades out of pick 29 or out of the first round and they don't get to experience that in Detroit? Now, he came out and said directly that the fan base isn't going to be the determining factor. They've done a fantastic job over the last several seasons, really since Brad Holmes has taken over, establishing their draft expertise, and they're not going to base this off of what a crowd wants them to do. They're going to do what's right for the organization and what's right for the team, and he came out and said that directly. And really, everything that Brad Holmes has said outwardly into the press and to the fan base really has held true. Yes, there's always some, draft talk, and you don't want to give away necessarily your strategy, but ultimately, as an organization, they've said what their plan is, and they've stuck to that plan. So he's come out and said if the ultimate move there and the best thing for the organization, for the team, is to move back, they'll go ahead and pull that trigger. And yes, the fan base will be upset. I would be a little disappointed if they don't pick in the first round. But ultimately, once you get over the draft, you get into the season and let some time go by, I'm sure that everyone will forgive them for trading out of the first round, because we know that they'll take ultimately the guy or the guys that they need to take here to fill the holes that need to be filled. So in looking at this again, And really the needs haven't changed over the several mock drafts that we've done here in the offseason. But in my opinion, the biggest need for the Lions still is in the defensive backfield. I've kind of waffled between, is it the defensive backfield or is it the defensive line? I think that they've done enough work on the defensive line, and it seems to me, based on what I'm hearing out of the organization, what it seems like they're working them sort of towards what they want to do, some of the pre-draft visits that they've had, to me seem to be leaning heavily towards the defensive backfield. So I think the need ultimately is at cornerback. We know the departure of Cam Sutton and all the reasoning behind that. We know the offseason moves that the organization made to try and bolster the defensive backfield. We've talked about that in many, many videos. Amik Robertson from Oakland, as well as Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay. So they've made several moves to try and shore up that room, but I still think they need some younger talent to then bolster that and kind of put somebody in that room that they can build off of in the future. Past that in the defensive backfield, again, they still have needs up front on the defensive line. We've talked about over and over again, still trying to find the help for Hutch. And again, they've done well in free agency. DJ Reader as a defensive tackle from Cincinnati, as well as Marcus Davenport from Minnesota. But we know both those guys are coming in with some injuries to worry about. And if we don't get the production from them that we're hoping for, then they may need additional help on the defensive line. So that's certainly something to look at in the draft. I also think they need additional help and to bolster the back end of their offensive line. They re-signed Graham Glasgow to fill the guard spot on one side of Frank Ragnow, and then they also went out and signed Kevin Zeitler from the Ravens to fill the other guard spot opposite of Frank Ragnow. But ultimately, you have two older guards, and then you have Frank Ragnow at center, who is now building up a case for injuries. He's got knee problems. He's got a horrific toe injury that he's been dealing with for several seasons. And ultimately, I don't know if they're going to re-sign guys like Taylor Decker. We know they're going to have to re-sign Penei Sewell. So there's going to be holes on that offensive line. And if injuries come into play, they're going to need to draft younger talent on the offensive line to just feel good about what they have going into 2024. They truly, in my opinion, have the best offensive line in football. Adding Kevin Zeitler, the guard, I think just adds to that. Yes, they lost their guard in Jonah Jackson, but they did a great job replacing him. And they have a ton of faith in Graham Glasgow, and he proved himself last year. So if they can add another piece, a younger piece on the offensive line, I think that would be a huge help as well. Past that, again, I think we're getting into more luxury picks. We've talked many mock drafts over about maybe the need for another wide receiver, another addition to that room, a bigger body guy, a boundary guy, somebody they could throw the ball up to in the end zone. Just some more size there in the wide receiver room to complement what you have in Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, and everything you're hoping to get out of Jamison Williams. I think they also are in the market for a kicker. We know they re-signed Michael Badgley, so they at least have faith enough to re-sign to bring him back, but I think they really need more competition at kicker. The kicker from the Michigan Panthers, I keep hearing a lot of buzz behind, but ultimately I don't know if they've had conversations with him, if that's a true option. But overall, we know that they haven't really had a solid, faithful kicker that they could rely on. Especially over the last several seasons. So I really think that in the back end of the draft, or maybe even after the draft's over as a kind of a free agent, they really should be looking for somebody that they can have some more confidence in at kicker. All right, so let's get into this mock draft 3.0 for the Detroit Lions. As I mentioned, we're going to use the Pro Football Network, the PFN mock draft simulator. We're going to do 3 different 3-round drafts, all for the Lions. We'll go at a slow pace. We will look at and entertain any trade offers that come our way. And I may get aggressive in one of these mock drafts just to sort of show what an option could be if Brad Holmes gets aggressive here in the draft. As we know, currently in the first 3 rounds, the Lions are set up to pick at number 29 at the end of the first round, pick number 61 in the second round, and at pick number 73 in the third round. So in this first mock draft sim, as things sort of played out, what I'm looking for here is sort of what is happening at the beginning of the draft. And then what will Brad Holmes' response be to what happens up front. I think we know it's going to be very quarterback heavy at the beginning of the draft and wide receiver. You'll see maybe a run on some offensive linemen as well. But I think what the Lions are truly interested in, what is happening at the edge position, what is happening at the cornerback position. And in this particular mock draft, Terrion Arnold goes off the board, the cornerback out of Alabama, at number 15 to the Colts, which then leaves Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo, who I think is the second best cornerback in this draft, still on the board. And this is at about pick 16, where Seattle will be picking. And this is about where I think if the Lions are going to move up in the first round, this is about the area where they will be able to make that move at about 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. Saints, Colts, Seahawks, Jaguars. And ultimately, if guys like Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold, you see Latu, the edge out of UCLA. I know Jared Verse, the edge out of Florida State. I've heard a lot of rumblings there. These are guys I think that could be difference makers on the Lions defense up front. And I think those few guys could be folks worthy of Brad Holmes moving up in the draft. So what I'm going to propose here for this particular draft is a trade from the Lions to move from pick 29 to pick 16, where Seattle is currently selecting. So I'm going to choose Seattle. We're going to have to give up, obviously, pick 29. We're looking for their pick 16 here. And in this scenario, if we're looking to move up, I think you're also having to give up your second-round pick. And then if you're looking to avoid giving up additional picks this year, you're probably then looking at giving them something next year, which probably looks at a third or second-round pick. Now, I've done a few previous mock drafts to know that in this particular scenario, it's going to require this second-round pick next year. So in this case, you're giving up pick 29 in exchange for pick 16, but you're also giving up pick 61 and a second round next year. So I'm going to propose that trade, and that has been accepted by Seattle. So we've now moved up from pick 29 to pick 16 to grab a player that is a difference maker on defense. In this case, I think you could go either way. Latu, the edge out of UCLA, or Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. In this particular draft, let's go ahead and resume the draft. I'm going to reject a trade to move back. But in this particular draft, I am more interested in grabbing the cornerback. I saw Terrion Arnold go off the board, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to take a difference maker at corner. And I think Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo is that guy. So at pick 29 for the Lions, I'm going with Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback out of Toledo. So as much as you're happy that you move up in the draft to get the guy that ultimately you want, the downside to this is then you're kind of relinquishing, again, your second-round pick. You may have to make other maneuvers there to make something like that happen. So it then limits what you truly can do. So you want to be very certain that if you are going to move up in the draft, and, I think we now certainly can trust Brad Holmes and his approach. And if he decides that he's pinpointed a player that they want, they go up and get him. For instance, Jameson Williams a few drafts ago at pick 12 in the first round, they moved up to get him. And I think that's ultimately now starting to pay off a little bit. So you're starting to trust that move. But again, you're losing some picks in the background. So you got to be very comfortable with that guy that you go and get. And in this particular mock draft, it then leaves us picking not only at 16, but then you're waiting until pick 73 in the third round to pick back up in this draft. All right, so again, we traded up in the first round to get the player that we wanted, the cornerback. We went with Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. Now puts us in the third round at pick 73. Of course, we went defense in round one. So now looking at the board, you really have to determine, okay, we've gotten our cornerback. We feel comfortable with that. Do we want to stick on defense? You see guys like Braden Fisk here, a D tackle out of Florida State. You also still have Braylon Trice, the edge, which I like out of Washington. So you have a couple good defensive choices here. Offensively, we've talked about Ricky Pearsall in previous mock drafts. I've taken him in many other mock draft simulations. So again, not a bad choice there. Jalen McMillan out of Washington as well would be a good wide receiver. And we've also taken Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. So you have some good wide receiver options here as well. Again, we went cornerback with Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo at pick 16. In this case, from what I'm seeing on the board for what fell to us, I don't think we pass up on taking the edge Braylon Trice. I know that would be very defensively heavy for this draft, But with him still being available here in round 3 for us at pick 73, I'm going to go ahead and take the edge out of Washington and really shore up our defensive side of the football in this draft with Braylon Trice. So here are the results from the first mock draft sim that we did for Mock Draft 3.0. And here is the example where Brad Holmes identifies the guy that they want in the first round. They had to package up some picks to move up in the first round to pick 16 from 29 to get the cornerback of the future in Quinyon Mitchell, shoring up your defensive backfield. He then supplants himself as CB1. And just imagine what that room looks like, the cornerback room with Quinyon Mitchell added in. You have him, Carlton Davis, Amik Robertson, all of the talent that you have at safety. It just really would solidify your defensive backfield 100%. I then followed up in round 3 with the edge, Braylon Trice out of Washington, which we've talked about before in previous videos, but I think would be a great secondary piece to Aiden Hutchinson, Marcus Davenport, the rest of the guys on the defensive line, just again adding to the depth of the defensive line and having somebody that you can build over the course of the next several seasons to pair up with Aiden Hutchinson. So a defensive-heavy first mock draft sim for us here, but you would have to feel really good about the Lions' defense heading into 2024. All right, now we're rolling through mock draft sim number 2 through Pro Football Network. In this one, we're going to kind of see what falls to us. We took the previous opportunity in that last mock draft sim to see what a trade up would look like. So let's let the chips fall to us here and see what happens as we approach pick 29 for the Detroit Lions. So in this mock draft sim, a couple of the key players did go early on. Terrion Arnold, the cornerback out of Alabama, went early, number 7 in this particular mock sim. Jared Verse went 14 to Florida State. And I don't think the Lions are going to have enough draft capital to move up for either of those guys in these scenarios. So in this particular mock draft sim, we let everything kind of fall to us at 29. There were no trades presented that really made sense as far as dropping back. So I'm going to go ahead and look at who's available then in this particular mock draft sim at 29. And I think the name that always pops out is Kool-Aid McKinstry. If they stick at 29 and he is available, I really don't think you could go wrong with that pick. The Lions have spent a lot of time at Alabama Pro Days, not only for Kool-Aid McKinstry, but also Terrion Arnold, which was interesting to me because I don't know if they have a shot at him. And the really only way that they do is if they make a big move to get up into that first round of the draft. And again, that's probably not something that they'll be able to do based on where I'm seeing him taken at 7. But Kool-Aid McKinstry would be a fantastic get for the Lions if those other 2 cornerbacks are not available. And the Lions, again, are very familiar with Alabama, their system, the defensive backs. Obviously, they have Brian Branch already on the team and would be familiar with Kool-Aid and vice versa. So it's a really good option there at 29. The other good option I see here is Jackson Powers-Johnson, and I've spent so much time on him over the last several mock sims that I won't beat this up. But if you don't see the cornerback that you like there and you want to make a pick at 29, to me, you cannot go wrong bolstering your offensive line. Jackson Powers-Johnson is primarily a center and would be your ultimate replacement for Frank Ragnow, but he can play both guard positions. So it would give you a lot of versatility up front and have you feeling very good about your offensive line. The way that I just see this broken out, I think that, again, all roads lead back to helping your defensive backfield, getting the cornerback at 29, I'm going to go ahead and draft Kool-Aid McKinstry. All right, now we're at pick 61, a second-round selection for the Lions. We went with Kool-Aid McKinstry in the first round, the cornerback. So now we're going to be looking and seeing who is available at pick 61. The 2 that pop out to me is you have 2 edges available to us. Chris Braswell, again, out of Alabama. I haven't heard a ton of buzz around his name as far as associated with the Lions, so I'd be surprised if he is available there in the second round for the Lions. Marshawn Nealon was really the name that kept popping up, and we've picked him in several other mock draft sims out of Western Michigan. So I think either one of those options at edge the Lions would be really happy with. And again, this would be sort of a defensive-heavy draft yet again. Offensively, Troy Franklin, the wide receiver. Don't hate it, but I'm not super familiar with him, so I don't know if I'd be comfortable with the Lions taking him in the second round. Chris Jenkins, the D-tackle out of Michigan, I like if you're, again, continuing to bolster your defensive line there. And Braylon Trice out of Washington is available as well. I mean, everything looks to be pointing towards taking an edge there. In this particular mock draft sim, again, it'll be defensively heavy. I'm going to go with Marshawn Nealon, the edge out of Western Michigan. I think he has a lot of upside coming from a smaller school, but he has the size I think the Lions are looking for, and again, would be a good complement to Aiden Hutchinson. So at pick number 61, I'm going to go with Marshawn Nealon, the edge out of Western Michigan. All right, so here we are in the third round, pick 73 for the Lions. And again, the first two mock draft sims have been very defensively heavy up front, which I don't think is a bad thing. We know the Lions offense has been really their go-to the last several seasons, and they're at elite status. They may even be the best offense in the NFL in 2024. So going defensively heavy in the draft is not a bad thing in my mind. It holds true in this second mock draft sim that we're doing today. So I think in the third round, if you went cornerback and edge in the first two, I'm going to be looking offensive in the third round at 73. Wide receiver is, again, the primary position of need, and going over the few available players here, Ricky Pearsall is a good option, but I think what's even better is Devontae Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina. A little bit more lengthy. I think he's got a little bit more strong hands, bigger body guy, go up and catch type guy, and that's really what the Lions need as we talked about entering this mock draft sim. They really need a bigger body size guy, somebody who has a boundary type and can get in the end zone and go up and catch a ball for us to complement the athlete that you already have in that room. So at pick 73 for the Lions, I'm going to go with the wide receiver out of North Carolina, Devontae Walker. So here are the players we were able to secure in the second mock draft sim. We started out staying at pick 29, going with the cornerback out of Alabama, Kool-Aid McKinstry, a very popular pick. That name alone has attracted many Detroit fans, and I really believe that at pick 29 he will be there and be available. So if they don't make a move, I think you should expect to maybe see that name at 29. I followed up in the second round, pick 61, with an edge, Marshawn Nealon out of Western Michigan. I think it would be a good athletic player to pair up with Aiden Hutchinson on the other end of the defensive line. And then at 73 in the third round, we finished up our wide receiver room by bringing in Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. I would be very happy with this draft here because you've addressed the primary needs on the defensive side of the football and added an offensive weapon on the other side of the football to continue to insulate Jared Goff and that offense. Now, I'd be a little bit concerned that you didn't address the offensive line of the football in the first three rounds, but my hope then is that Brad Holmes will continue to cook over the rest of the draft and find one or two more guys that they're happy with to bolster that offensive line later on in the draft. All right, so here we are in the third mock draft simulation. In this particular case, again, no trades really came to us that made sense. I was actually looking to move back, but I really wasn't able to put something together that even I would be comfortable with as far as giving up additional picks to move back. So, there just wasn't anything available there. But what I did notice is that in this mock draft, Cooper DeJean is available. I don't know if that's realistic unless some funny things happen in front of us in the draft. But if this happens to be true and he is available at 29, I am absolutely taking Cooper DeJean as our first round pick. Now we're moving into the second round, pick 61. Again, we went Cooper DeJean in the first round, the safety, but he's kind of a jack of all trades in the defensive backfield and can return kicks, which may actually be very beneficial in the new kick style, the new kickoffs that are going to take place here in 2024. But now we're sitting at 61 in the second round and sort of left with what do we do now with this pick? I don't see anything offensively that makes sense. They're not really in a market for another tight end, knowing they brought back Brock Wright and they have Sam Laporta. And because we took the defensive back, we really don't need another safety. So all roads kind of lead back to the defensive line. And again, who is sitting here in the second round waiting for us to pick him is Marshawn Nealon. I've seen him go as high as higher in the second round. So if he becomes available and you haven't taken a defensive lineman here yet in the draft, I think in the second round this would be a really good pick. So at pick 61 for the Lions, I'm going to take the edge, Marshawn Nealon out of Western Michigan. So now we're in our third round pick 73. And again, we've had three mock draft sims that have been heavily focused on the defense. And I don't know if it's because That's the players that have fallen to us. Maybe that's because that's what's in my head. And it really will all depend on what the Lions see as their primary need, or if they've identified a guy in the draft that just makes most sense to them. But in this mock draft sim and for our mock draft 3.0, it appears that everything is leaning very defensively heavy in the first several rounds. So in this mock draft sim, we've went Cooper DeJean at 29, the safety out of Iowa. Then at 61, we followed up with the edge, Marshawn Kneeland. So now we're picking at 73. And I believe now in this case, because we've been defensively heavy, again, we're looking back then at a wide receiver. And the few names that pop up for us here are Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver out of Florida, Jalen McMillan, the wide receiver out of Washington, and Devontae Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina. Now, I've looked at the profiles of all three of these guys, and although I'm not an expert on any one of these players, ultimately, to me, the athlete that makes the most sense all leads back to Devontae Walker. I've looked at Ricky Pearsall in previous mock draft sims, and we've talked about that. But again, now looking into these players a little bit more, I think that Devontae seems to fit the bill for what the Lions really need in that room in 2024. So at pick 73, we're going to take Devontae Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina. So here are the results of our last mock draft sim. We took Cooper DeJean at pick 29, the safety out of Iowa, followed up in the second round at pick 61 with the edge, Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. And then in the third round at pick 73, went with the wide receiver weapon, Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. So that'll do it for our mock draft 3.0. Extremely defensively heavy in this round. Not sure if that's because I'm leaning so heavily that way or if that's just the way that the board fell. Ultimately, the organization and Brad Holmes will make the right decision. If that means moving up to grab the player that they see fit, or if that means moving back because it just didn't fall to them the way that they wanted it to, I think that we can trust that they'll make the right moves to fill the holes to make this team a contender in 2024. I'm very excited. I really believe that if they can fill another cornerback, another defensive lineman, some help on the offensive line, and look at maybe another offensive weapon somewhere mixed in throughout this draft, if they can find ways to do that, and I really trust that Brad Holmes will do so, I think that this team is in the driver's seat, not only in the NFC Central, but the NFC overall, and they are a true Super Bowl contender. I'm so excited for this draft because the team has proven that this is where they build from. This is where their strength is held, through the draft, cultivating these players that become pillar parts of the organization, and then filling the holes to make this all come true. It should be a fantastic week ahead. We're just a few days away from the actual draft. Definitely come back and see me. We'll do a full draft review. We'll kind of see what the Lions did in the first couple days of the draft. We'll then look ahead at the roster and kind of what's to come in the offseason as we get ever so close to the 2024 season. So many fun things to come. Thank you guys so much for coming along for another video. If you dig the vibe here at Johnny Guest Sports or what we did here today, make sure to hit that like button. It's the best way to help out the channel. Hit the subscribe button and the notify bell so you don't miss any future videos on the channel. We are on the road to 500 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Again, definitely come back and see me. Make sure to take care of yourself and your mental health. I want to see you guys on future videos. Thank you again so much for your time. You have an excellent day.